Here's a few things to start off this next video. This is my accessory bracket, which I'll try to show you a picture of. It was absolutely filthy and black and just horrible. But I had it sit in this all-purpose cleaner for a few days. Took it out, scrubbed the hell out of it, got it real nice, put it back in here and let it sit for another couple days. So this thing's been sitting for at least about a week. And you can see most of the grime is off of it. I give it one quick scrub. I don't know, probably clean it, we'll see, but I'm not at that point yet. I'm getting ready to do the heads and the head gaskets. So these, you'll see, are the head bolts. Normally I would use head studs, ARP head studs. But when I bought all this stuff off of a guy, I got these bolts with it. And I know they weren't used for very long, maybe a couple thousand miles, because the guy hurt his motor. But he threw all these bolts in and they're in perfect condition, and there's no reason not to reuse these since I have them. Saved myself $100 or more. And God only knows if you can even get the ARP head studs, because it's tough to get anything right now. But I'll be cleaning these up and all the old anti-seize and everything that they used on them, and get ready for the next step. Some normal preparation steps that I've done on other things. This is the thread cleaning tool that I've showed you before. 7/16 by 14 for the head bolts. And I'm running it in here to make sure that the threads going into these heads are perfectly clear and clean, because you want them to seal, because there's coolant jackets, like these all go into coolant, so that coolant will seep through the bolts if you don't have a perfectly clean thread surface in here and a perfectly clean bolt. And then you have to seal the bolt too, which I'll show you in a minute. But I'm running this cleaning tool through here to make sure it's knocking any of the junk out, which is good with this tool is it doesn't actually push it in. Since they're slotted, it takes everything out with it. I think I did this hole, so this is clean, but some of these are coming out pretty junked up. There's one here. You can see how much junk came out of that hole. And that can cause a sealing problem. You can have water seeping through if that doesn't seal the bolt to the inside of the thread. So I'm finished cleaning out the holes for the bolts. I did 2 passes on each bolt, vacuumed them, blew them out, both sides of the motor. Those bolt holes are as clean as I think I can get them. So the next thing I'm going to do is go around to all these exposed cylinders that have oil in them. I've wiped them all down with oil periodically to make sure nothing was rusting in there, since they're kind of exposed. But I'm going to wipe all that stuff out and clean it with lacquer thinner, clean the surface area with lacquer thinner, and apply new fresh oil to it, because once the head's on, I'll no longer have access to any of these cylinders, and I want them to stay lubricated until this thing starts and fires up. Using this kind of rag, they typically don't have any lint. It's like a lint freestyle rag. It's probably not the best one, but it's what I have available, so I'm going to use it. And I'll clean these out, and then I'll lacquer thinner it real good, and then I'll apply a fresh film of oil in all of the exposed cylinders, so 2 on this side and 2 on that side. All right, let's talk about a couple things here before going forward. Mainly, what kind of gaskets am I putting on here? A lot of you guys on here, I'm sure, are very familiar with all this stuff, so it doesn't really matter. But if you're not, this is the choice I'm making as a Cometic head gasket. It's a multi-layer steel gasket. And again, if you're familiar with this, no big deal. If you're not, you always kind of wanted to know what the big difference is. Here it is. This is 3 layers of steel, like shims almost. And they put them all together with rivets. 3 rivets hold them together. This diameter is a 60 thousandths overbore diameter. So it'll work with a stock bore, a 20 overbore, 30 overbore, maybe even up to a 40 overbore. But you always want this diameter to be a little bigger than your opening. These are, when they crush to 40 thousandths, which is pretty standard to not make any compression changes. I think they make them in a, I don't know, smaller compression. They make them so you can lower the compression, raise the compression. There's no reason for me to do anything different with this car. But in the past, I've got different ones, like I said, on the Ford motors, and that would help me lower or raise the compression. Thicker gaskets, thinner gaskets. The reason that I'm using these gaskets is because I've used them on everything I've ever had before, and I've never had a failure out of them. They're extremely strong because they're steel. So that's the benefits of them, is that you don't really lose a head gasket because they're steel and you're not going to blow it out. The downside to these gaskets, I think I'll give you two off the top of my head. One of them is that some people look at the gasket as a fuse. And if the car has a failure, let's say a fuel pump fails, methanol pump fails, vacuum line pops off the regulator, which has happened to me in my previous video at the track, and you lose fuel pressure, if the car goes into wild detonation, it could push the gasket right out of the side. If you have a paper or graphite style gasket, it can push the gasket right out of the side of the block. But it's basically like popping a fuse. You know, you pop the gasket, pull the car over, and you're good. Take it apart, and you haven't caused any major damage, just a head gasket change. The downside is that these don't do that. These, you might have some sort of an engine block failure or a crank rod piston. Something catastrophic could happen because you don't have this fuse to blow in the middle there. So that's a risk that I'm willing to take, because I don't want to blow a fuse. I don't want to have a head gasket spit out for some stupid reason and have to do a head gasket change. In my opinion, if the head gasket failed, I'd probably pull the motor out and rebuild the whole motor anyway, as opposed to this not failing and then have a motor failure, and then the motor's got to come out and I got to rebuild the motor anyway. So it's kind of the same outcome. If something breaks in this car, it's the same outcome. I don't work on the motor while it's still in the car. It's just not something I ever want to do. So these are the Cometic gaskets. There's the packaging, and it's a part number C5691-40. Pretty standard Cometic gasket. These have been on every car I've ever had where the heads came off. A couple Mustangs, a couple Regals. The other thing to mention here is that the manufacturer recommends putting these on dry, just like this, out of the box. But that's also assuming that the motor has been through the machine shop and the head surface has been milled. The deck of the motor has been milled and freshened, skimmed, or whatever they call it. And then your head's the same thing. Fresh heads right out of the machine shop or right out of the packaging. So then you have such nice machine surfaces that you can put these metal gaskets on with dry with no coating. My heads are that. They have been through the machine shop, so the heads are fine, but the block has not. And it's not been machined, so it's, you know, the 35-plus-year-old deck surface where an old graphite gasket had to come off of it. So I'm a little concerned about that side, but I have something for that. So these will not be going on dry, and I'll show you what we're going to do here. The stuff right here, Hylomar. Some people probably say, yep, I know exactly what that is. I've used it. It's been around forever. It's an old trick. Some people might not know anything about any of this, so now you do. But the problem with head gaskets is if you ask 10 different people, you're going to get 10 completely different answers. It's the same thing with engines, transmissions. It's all the same. Everyone has their own, what their granddad, worked for them, what the guy at work told them that's 100 years old, knows everything about everything, Indian, shellac, and every kind of old wise tale you can ever imagine. This particular one just has always worked for me. So Hylomar, when you spray it on there, it's a non-hardening adhesive style coating that you'll coat this gasket with. And the reason that I'm doing it is because if there's imperfections in the block, the head, or even in the gasket alone, these gaskets aren't foolproof. There could be imperfections in the gasket. This will create that safety barrier where it might absorb imperfections. So I'll show you that in a little bit when I spray them. Some people use copper coat spray right off the shelf at any auto parts store, and I'm sure that works just as good. I'm sure anything anybody uses is fine. Again, everybody has their own way, but this stuff just works for me, so I'm going to use it. Now, the problem, the difficult downside to this part is, number one, if you try to reuse the gasket, which I don't think I'd ever do anyway, I don't know how you get that stuff off or recoat it or what you would do there. I just would assume not reusing the gasket. It's also hard to get. You have to buy it online. It's about $20 for this little bottle that may do both gaskets, but it's close. I've always had it get real close to not doing all the gaskets, but they do. So it's $20. You have to order it online. You can't buy it at any local store. I think it comes from Germany or something. Some other country makes it. But again, everybody has their own way to do this. This is just mine. Here's another thing we're going to get out of the way, because I'm sure this is going to provoke comments. So let's get it out of the way and talk about it now. These bolts, they have to be coated when they go into the block because they go into water jackets where there's coolant. So if you don't coat them, they're going to leak. Everybody has their own way to do that. And here's all the different ways. PTFE thread sealant, ARP thread sealant, RTV adhesive, or just regular RTV gasket maker. You know, you obviously have to put anti-seize on them for when you're torquing. I'll explain that in a little bit. So there's a couple different ways to do this. I've used black RTV with good luck on the Ford motors because the bottom bolts go into water jackets, and a lot of people have problems with PTFE sealant really causing it to not seep. And same thing with the Buick. This is a 10 different people have 10 different answers. So I've really racked my brain on this, and I'm having a little bit of a struggle on which way to go. At this moment, I still don't even know for sure, but I think since I found this whole tube of ARP thread sealer, I'm going to use this, I think. And I'm going to roll the dice and hope that these bolts don't seep coolant through them because I didn't go with that RTV. The reason I don't want to go with the RTV is because if there's a reason I have to go backwards into this and take a bolt out, that stuff hardens up and sets inside of the bolt hole. And I don't know if there's any going backwards. You're going to end up with a really contaminated bolt thread when you put that RTV in there. And also, since this motor's on the stand, I can come back in a couple days and knock these bolts loose and then retorque them a second time to get a little bit of a better crunch out of the gasket. That's something I might consider doing too. So I'm going to use this because it's non-hardening, and I think when you back it up and you retorque it, it's not going to cause any problems in the bolt hole. So that's likely the way I'm headed here. Back to the gasket. We have to prep this gasket before we spray it with the Hylamar. Now, one of the things that people do is they drill out the 3 rivets holding all 3 of these together, and they Hylamar coat each, or whatever coat they use, they coat each layer of the gasket back and front. And that's not a bad idea. I do respect people doing that, but I do not feel like drilling these things out and causing that big of a project. Although, I think that the inside of these gaskets is not the best, so it probably is the best way you can do that is to drill those. I'm going to use lacquer thinner to prep this, to get all the contamination off of it. Again, when people take all of these layers apart, they wash them with soap and water, and I would respect that way better than what I'm going to do. But I don't really want to take them in the house and scrub them all out and then blow them all off. And if I don't cut the layers apart, I can't scrub them with soap and water because I won't be able to clean inside the layers out. So I just have to skip that step and just clean them with lacquer thinner the best that I can. And again, I've done that in the past. I've cleaned them with lacquer thinner, sprayed them with Hylamar, put them on the car, and never had an issue in thousands of miles. And years later, they're still out there performing for new owners. So I'm not really worried about that. Here's a test fit that I'm going to do. I'm going to put the gasket in place and I'm going to drop the head on it just to make sure there's nothing I'm either forgetting. Just make sure everything goes together the first time. That way when I spray the gaskets, everything will go on nice and smooth and I won't be like, oh man, I forgot to do something. So these are 2 studs, 7/16 by 14, same as the head bolts I'm going to use. This is a leftover set of studs from a previous car, and I kept them. I think I might have lost one, so I couldn't sell them, so I kept them. But they make a good tool to indicate the head, basically. So I'll be able to lower the head in place using them studs and get it on this dowel pin right here, just 2 dowel pins. That way, you know, you're not fishing around trying to get the head to stay on and then drop a bolt in place. The heads are heavy. You know, I don't want it to fall on the floor or anything crazy. So the studs will hold it. They'll indicate it for me. Here's a quick little mock-up where I drop the head down with the gasket in place. You can see it sitting on the 2 studs. Okay, so I'm ready to coat this gasket. You can see I hung it from the ceiling from a coat hanger. Shut my heater off to get rid of the open flame. And covered up the car with a car cover. And I'll just try to do 1 coat on each side. And the instructions on the can say wait 10 minutes, I guess, to let, there's a solvent base in here, and it says the solvent has to dry in this actual adhesive. Here's a close-up. You see the texture that it has with the Hylamar spray on it. It's no longer super smooth. It's kind of has a texture to it now. What I like about that texture is that can fill in any imperfections. that will actually have a little bit of give to it, filling it in a perfection. Okay, it's been 10 minutes here, so I'm going to drop this gasket down in place. Okay, so in order to put the bolts in, we're going to do the following procedure. ARP fastener lube, which is basically like an anti-seize/oil. You're going to lube the top of the bolt shoulder so that when you're torquing it down, there's no resistance. It's nice and smooth. You get a proper torque reading. And you also have to use that on this washer. So when you tighten this down, all that stuff is not spinning with any resistance. It's spinning with the fastener lube. And that's how you get the proper torque reading. And then we have to seal the threads going into the block because again, coolant might leak through the threads. Okay, I think that the shoulder and the washer have enough on there. This is interesting, and this is something worth sharing. I was getting ready to, use this ARP stuff, and I put it on this bolt here on the left, and I instantly realized that I just didn't really like the consistency of it. It's kind of suddy and almost broken down looking, and I thought, number one, you're going to screw this into the threads, and it's probably going to lose half of it, and number two, if there's any like porosity in that, fluid's going to work, I don't know, maybe it could work its way through there. So I said, for the heck of it, let me get out this other stuff that I have on hand, which I showed before. It's the Permatex thread sealant, PTFE, and look at the consistency of that. That's what I'm looking for right there, not that. So I think I'm going to switch over and use that, and you could read 10 different people's ideas of what to use here, but ultimately you need to make a decision on what you're comfortable with, because you don't want to do this twice. And that on the right to me looks like it'll hold more fluid back than what's on the left. Okay, so all the bolts are installed in the head. They're all Teflon sealed. They all have Moly Lube on them, and I'm getting ready to start the torquing process. So I have the sequence over here written on a board on my whiteboard, so I'll be looking back at that. It's pretty simple. You always start at the middle and you do a crisscross pattern out to the sides, because that gives you an even distribution of force across the head. You never want to work from the outside in, work from the inside out. So first I'll start with just a regular small 3/8 ratchet with the proper socket on it, and just kind of barely snug them before I torque them so that they're not all kind of loose and out of place. Again, I'm looking over at my whiteboard to get the proper sequence here. Okay, so there's that. Okay. 5. Okay, so now I'm going to torque them for the first sequence. There's 3 steps. I'm probably going to go 50, 60, or 50, 70, and 80, or 50, 75, 85, something like that. You got to do it in 3 separate steps, though. Okay, there's my first 50. And then I'll go to number 2 in the cross pattern and do 50. Number 3. So there's my first sequence. So I'll go from 50 go up another 10 pounds to 60. Okay, 60. There's another 10 to 70. That's 70. Now, still not 100% sure what I want to torque these to. I do a search across line. I read every possible thing I possibly can anytime before I do a job like this, just to take it all in and weigh it with my experiences. I don't exactly love the ARP moly lube that you're putting on these things. I can feel that it's got a little bit of resistance still. It's not like when you put oil on there. I probably should have put anti-seize or oil. Against my better judgment, I use the ARP stuff and I don't like it. But 85 is the number that I see a lot online, but I think that's with oil. I'm going to try to go to 85 here because I really don't want this thing to fail. And I'm just hoping that I don't get to a situation where it pulls threads out of the head. That would be traumatic. Sure hope that doesn't happen. But right now we are at 70. And I'm going to switch over to my 1/2 inch torque wrench and try to bring it to 85. Or maybe I'll bring it to 80. See how I like it and then bring it to 85. Okay, 80 on here now. Back to number 1. Bigger torque wrench. I use the click style torque wrenches because I just like the way it just gives it a big halt when you hit the number. I used to have a real nice expensive digital one, and I felt like as soon as you hit the beep, you can't get off the wrench fast enough, and sometimes you just go a little bit over. You just over torque just a little bit. I didn't really like that. I like this click stop kind. So these are cheap Craftsman, but they work really good. Oh, that was already at 80. Wonder if that's the variance in 2 different torque wrenches. Some of these barely moved at 80. Now I'm going to take it to 85, which is the magic number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. There shouldn't be much out of this because it keeps going 5 pounds. Okay, it took 85 perfectly. So this head is torqued down. Actually just finished up the first head, torqued it all down, so that's good. I'm going to start on this head, which is the second head, and getting ready to spray the other head gasket and go forward. But I realized I don't think I've said anything about these heads. I did do a previous video where I talked about when I picked all this stuff up, but in case you haven't seen that, I'll just give you the cliff notes. I bought these heads, a matching Champion ported intake, T&D shaft rockers, a full throttle 210, 215 cam, head bolts. It's a pretty good package, and I did not pay a lot. These heads I paid $500 for, and the reason is because it had a bent valve. And obviously it was a steal because the valves, you know, whatever that costs, $100, $150, $70. I don't know what a valve costs, I forget now, but I figured I would just put a valve in it. Well, it was more than that. I ended up dropping them off at the machine shop, and I put $800 into these heads. So I think I'm still under what a new set cost, but I have a fully fresh set of Champion CNC ported irons right out of the machine shop. Nice decks on them. I replaced 4 valves. One was really bad. He said the other 3 of them were not good either. And the reason is because the original owner had a bottom end failure, and it caused all kinds of problems with the valves. So these springs are all set up. I think they're about 140 pounds at the seat. I honestly don't even know what they are open. I know they were set up. The people who did the heads were Slawco, which is a big racing head service in the Philadelphia area, and they do all real high dollar racing stuff. So they reset these up. I set them up the first time for the stock setup, but they redid them and shimmed them and got everything equal. So new valves, port job. In my opinion, this is the downside to the Champion irons versus the aluminums, is the size of the valve. I don't know the exact sizes off the top of my head, but you can't go bigger on the valve. So basically stock size valves. That's the downside to the Champion irons versus the aluminum. This is why you can't go bigger on the valves. There is no room there between those valves to go larger. So it's a take what you can get situation. But these things do work really well. Obviously, people have gone really fast with Champion irons. So, but I thought I'd say a little bit about them before I put the last one on. Get ready to make the last pass here at 85 on the second side, the driver's side here. Passenger side's done. I did that first. This side I kind of just fast forwarded it. But I figured I'd do it with the sequence showing so you can see why. I'll start at 1, down to 2, 3, okay, so everything's to 85 on both sides. Alright, heads are on. Got a lot further today. Now with editing, this is going to look like it took an hour. But in fact, I've really been at this all day because I took a lot of time to research things and look and read. And last time I did this was years ago. I did do an intake change on this car when I got it, and that was in 2017, so going on 5 years ago. But that's the last time I did a big job on this car, so I really have to refresh my memory. So I spent a lot of time reading before I did this, and all really throughout while I was doing it. So it may look like this, I knocked it out in an hour, but the fact is I've been at this all day on a Saturday. So now I can finish painting it, this front cover. I forgot to order the water pump. I have to do that, and get the intake on. Maybe I'll even do that tomorrow. And we're getting a lot closer here.